God'll get you for that. My religious upbringing was a mixed bag. As a kid, I thought Passover Seders were interminable, boring, and unfair, since we had to wait so long to eat. I regret that when my father took me to shul on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, I usually found someone to sneak out with, and it occurs to me I may have found a nearby hot dog stand on occasion. My mother didn't exactly keep a kosher house, although she did her best. So far as I knew, my father had grown up in one, but in his own house, he settled for my mother's good intentions. I know he didn't have separate plates and utensils for meat and dairy, and as far back as I can remember, we had bacon in the fridge. When I got older and asked my father about that, why he refused to eat pork or ham but ate bacon, he said with lawyerly sensibility, "Because I like bacon." Once on a plane, he mistakenly ate a ham sandwich, protesting afterwards that he thought it was corned beef, and by the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. I always attended churches with friends when I was invited, constantly risking conversation. But I had schoolmates, and girls I liked, who were not allowed to play with me, or date me, because I was Jewish, and who certainly would not have been permitted to attend synagogue with me. It's probably just as well. I would have set a pretty bad example. I'm sure that my parents were relieved when I married a Jewish girl. What they were really afraid of was that I wouldn't finish college if I married before I graduated. Surprisingly, it was my mother who tried to bribe Deborah with an heirloom ring so she'd wait until I finished school. Deborah accepted the ring, and she told my mother there was no way she'd marry someone who didn't plan to graduate from college. We were married during exam week of my junior year. When I was a kid, we always celebrated the holiday season. The 8 days of Hanukkah, of course, and the season of goodwill to all men of goodwill, by hanging stockings on the fireplace and exchanging what could only be described as Christmas presents. This mixed tradition was never discussed, just taken for granted, and I wonder if my booby was ever aware of it. I enjoyed visiting the homes of friends where there were Christmas trees, especially when I was encouraged to help decorate them. A few friends with trees were Jewish, but they attempted to deceive themselves by referring to them as Hanukkah bushes. One of my happiest memories as a child was driving with my parents at night through the upscale residential neighborhoods outside of Boston to see the Christmas lights. I attended Sunday school and Hebrew school, Cheder, before my bar mitzvah. My father and Harold Michelson carpooled, driving each other's kids on alternate Sundays. Years later, after my Uncle Abe died, my Aunt Teresa married Harold, whose wife Jessie had passed away. They were old friends and found comfort with each other. They lived in the same white frame house in Concord, Mass. That I remembered as a child. And I guess Harold's boys, David and Ricky, became my step-cousins. In grammar school, a period during the day was devoted to religious Christian studies. So much for the Constitution. But it was not obligatory, so far as I know. Those of us who chose not to participate attended study hall instead. I don't remember how many of us there were. I might have been alone. I always wondered what mysteries I had missed by leaving the class, and as I grew older, I wished I had stayed to find out. At least that might have hedged the bet. For a Sunday school play, my mother fashioned Joseph coat of many colors for me. She made it of muslin and colored strips of crepe paper, which she sewed meticulously in even vertical rows. It was truly beautiful, and I wore it proudly. For as long as she felt well enough, and her hands were steady, my mother knitted many beautiful Afghans for her children and grandchildren. When Deborah and I lived in Woodland Hills, our house was just at the edge of a traditional Christmas tree lane neighborhood, with several blocks of elaborate lights, decorations, and displays. We lived on a cul-de-sac, which was inaccessible during the weeks before Christmas and between Christmas and New Year's because of traffic. If we made the mistake of going grocery shopping or out to dinner in that time frame, getting home was impossible. People drove from great distances, and the streets were jammed. Once on our way home, the kids needed to use the bathroom, and they had to walk home for several blocks, threading their way among the creeping cars. Before we moved into the area, when the kids were small, we were among the tourists, and once a gigantic Santa Claus terrified Susan when he stuck his head into the open car window and shouted, "Ho, ho, ho!" Deborah and I were among the founding members of a small congregation with a young progressive rabbi, Don Singer. At first, the minuscule choir rehearsed in our living room, and we held Friday night services in a meeting room above the neighborhood bowling alley. The sound of strikes and spares lent a certain zest to the proceedings. Later, we rented a nearby church for Friday nights and holidays, and eventually a beautiful modern temple was erected. Dues were raised, the congregation turned fractious, and our friend Don Singer was fired. When I was in junior high, another congenial rabbi named Berkowitz was fired for playing ping pong with the boys after Saturday morning services in a storefront. Obviously, that's how he got us there. No one showed up after that. When Rabbi Singer left, we felt the end was near for us, but lingered long enough to attend a weekend couples retreat with him at a monastery near Pierre Blossom in the high California desert. We got lost in the middle of nowhere looking for the place, and Deborah was starting to get anxious, because I see poorly at night. It was dark when we finally found it, just in time for supper. Afterward, we were welcomed by the Abo, and we settled into our plain room, knowing the mornings came early. The monks observed silence at breakfast, which I found surprisingly refreshing. They had a successful pottery-making business, which helped support them. The discussion groups were informal, the brothers reserved but friendly. We walked the stations of the cross and attended vespers in the afternoon. I enjoyed the peace and calm, and it was innocent enough, but I know that somewhere, someone in my family was putting her head into an oven. I must say it never occurred to me to convert, but there were times as a kid when I kept my religious background to myself, afraid of getting my ass kicked. I was chased home for several blocks by an older kid once, falling several times and skinning my knees till they bled, much to my mother's horror. But I didn't think it was because I was Jewish. The kid just didn't like me. I suppose I was relatively lucky because I didn't look Jewish, or have a typically Jewish name. Rogosin is Russian. It's a name that appears in Crime and Punishment, and when I worked at Columbia, a film lab technician, Nick Lepkowitz, told me he knew a Rogosin in the old country. It means a kind of burlap, a covering, the bark of a tree, depending on who you ask. Usually, people got to know me first as a person, and by the time they found out I was Jewish, it simply didn't matter. Of course, with people who really mattered, it didn't matter regardless. I think my father felt he'd suffered from his share of anti-Semitism, and I think it scared him, but he didn't elaborate on it. During World War II, when he wanted to join the Judge Advocates Corps, as much for job security and benefits as for patriotism, I thought, guiltily, he was turned down, but it was probably because he had a history of sinusitis and hay fever. It always bothered him that he missed out on being commissioned, at least as a captain. It hurt his pride. But he made up for it a little when he was admitted to practice before the Supreme Court. More and more, I have questions about some of the Jewish traditions, particularly Passover, which seems so rooted in concepts of death and destruction. Gathering each year with my family, my kids, and their kids, I wonder if we can't come up with a more contemporary Pacific observance. Everyone is promised to think about it, and perhaps next year we can improvise something that better reflects our dedication to peace and harmony. I know that next year in Jerusalem doesn't apply to any of us. But I also know that when I read about the volunteers in Israel who pick up bits and pieces of dead Jews for burial after suicide bomber attacks, my sense of Jewishness is restored. In Auckland, New Zealand, I recall coming across an old Jewish cemetery the first day I was there. And in Rome, Deborah and I stumbled onto the ruins of the old ghetto we'd seen pictured in one of our art books. Both incidents had a special impact. When I first visited Portsmouth, New Hampshire, scouting locations for a TV movie, I had the definite sensation that I'd been there before. I'm struck by that familiarity each time I return. Was I there, perhaps in another life? Was it merely similar to another place I've known? Was I having some kind of religious experience? Would it have been a uniquely Jewish experience? I've come to believe in a world full of possibilities, of variations, and to feel that coincidence is reality. As I grow older, naturally, thoughts of mortality arise more often. And I wonder about God and whether He's noted my skepticism of ritual, my spiritual deficiencies, and whether He'll hold me responsible. I'd like to believe there's some higher power, but I have trouble accepting it on faith. If it's God, I hope He'll take into account my good intentions. Of course, to have faith in God is to believe He knows everything about everyone and sees into every heart. So I guess I'm covered.